let's get into this. All right, so let's go right to the point of this video, which is when can the Social Security Administration, using actual investigators, go into your house and begin at things, pulling things apart, going through stuff, etc., in order to see whether or not you should continue your Social Security benefits. Now, some of you will think that this only applies to those on SSI or SSI, which is common disability benefits, but that's not true. There's other programs such as retirement, benefits, etc., where they could also be doing this. There's a lot of stuff that you have to learn from this video, so I'm going to try and keep it very, very focused on categories of information, because there are different points at which things must happen that the government has to do, that basically you do as well, that will pique their interest to create the scenario where it moves from being an administrative situation to a criminal investigation. Okay, so I don't want to waste any time. I'm going to get right into it. Yes, the government seems to be ramping up the techniques and also the programs that are used to go ahead and investigate people to see if they're truly the disabled person, which they claim they are. And then this also applies to retired people who shouldn't be receiving benefits or somehow receiving too much benefits as a result of them playing some games. So let's get right into it. All right, an investigation has to begin for some reason for them to get access to your house. Now, that can come in lots of different ways. It can be a tip from the public, which is usually your coworkers and your neighbors. Those are kind of like the usual suspects. Or it could potentially come from an SSA employee. So, for example, when you talk to the SSA employee at the local field office, if you have animals making a lot of sounds in the background, like you live on a farm, and they look up and see a website with your face on it, that you're the one that upkeeps the horses or upkeeps the pigs or upkeeps the sheep, then guess what? That's going to go ahead and trigger some response review from them. So there might be a tip from the local field office, the regional office. There might be a tip from, for example, DDS, which is Disability Determination Services, or maybe somebody from OHO. It could be an ALJ, AAJ, or one of their staff members. Now, here's the thing. A lot of you guys tend to think about tips coming solely from the immediate group, somebody who knows you, somebody who basically might be interacting with you on behalf of the government. Sometimes it comes from secondaries, sort of like the CIA, FBI, or the IRS, or some other group that gets something that doesn't make sense, for who you are as an individual. So what happens is, or the big one, here's the big one too. Let's say that you go to the doctor, right? And you're basically interacting with the doctor and you tell the doctor one thing, and then you ask the doctor to take that one thing out later. That could ring a bell if they do a search for documents that were originally posted and then documents that were modified thereafter. Because remember, they have an AI machine now that can scan, basically what was originally created and what was modified thereafter, if the medical facility didn't pull the old document out. Because remember, a lot of those medical facility CMS programs, client management systems for medical documentation, their PII or PI departments, what happens is this, they may modify your document, but somewhere saved in there, somewhere on the timeline, is that original PDF that they uploaded. So let's go through, basically what's going on with this whole situation. All right, so let's say that there's a weird medical report where you have one doctor that completely believes that you're disabled, and then you have another doctor that doesn't believe that that you were disabled in any way, fashion, or form. When you get super opposing documents like that, that tends to create a scenario where, to be fair, right, you are essentially in a situation where, it creates this like, okay, is this person really disabled at all, or are they super disabled? Where are they in the spectrum of this? The SSA tends to like to send people to their own doctors at that point to get a third differing opinion. There's another thing that could pop up, which is that computer glitches, basically in their system, can sometimes flag you. Let's say that there's some information missing that shouldn't be missing. Let's say that there's something scheduled that's improper. That can always raise a flag as well. Another thing that tends to get you guys quite a bit, and remember, I've done quite a few of those like 1 hour consultations. Now we did the 30-minute as well ones. But basically the 1 hour consultations, usually what happens is somebody's being investigated. So what they do is they reach out to me and they go, okay, I'm being investigated. I know that they're doing this, this, and this. The SSA local field office is giving me a heads up as to this. What do I do? And so one of the big things that, if you already have that knowledge, if you already know that, most of your online presence has already been scanned, saved, categorized, and basically is now part of the adjudication. So when you're sitting back and going like, "Hey, I want to go ahead and erase and scrub my online existence," at that point it's there. They already have it. It's going to show up in the ROI report. They've already got it. So things that you guys tend to do that tends to cause some problems for you as individuals who are receiving benefits. You'll do videos where basically you're climbing up and down steps going into your house. You'll do videos where you're joking with other people. You'll do videos where you're out boating, having a good time with your kids or your cousins or your nephews or whatever. You'll do a video where basically at a horse show. You'll do a video where you're going to get ice cream with everybody and smiling and joking with everybody. When you post those videos, when you post that stuff, and you have to understand something too, and I think this is really important to point out. Some of you live in like the city, right? And so getting around in the city is tough because you got to walk everywhere or take a cab everywhere because a lot of people don't have a car in the city. You know what I mean? It's like a highly developed area that's been hyper, corporate controlled, where people are usually either poor or working. And then there's a very small percentage that are super rich. And so, like, what you have to keep in mind is that, these people that live in the city, it is a totally different spectrum of how they get caught. And then the SSA goes and basically investigates them than somebody who lives in like North Dakota or Washington or Alaska or Maine. Those are two totally different spectrums of, not that those states don't have big cities, but you know what I mean. It ain't New York City, you know what I mean? So the bottom line is you have to think about your situation and how it would apply to you, and then consider it against somebody who would live in the suburbs and somebody who would live in the city, because that will give you more ideas about other tactics that are used to investigate people. But again, going back to it geographically, if you live in the sticks in the middle of nowhere, how they're going to catch you, how they're going to say that you're not disabled, usually is a different approach than, for example, somebody who lives in apartment 14C, on Fifth Avenue and, basically, right next to the hot dog cart that always sets up every Thursday. So it's a very different spectrum of, how they go and approach investigating that person. All right, so let's talk about some of these, videos and things like that. So as you guys know, back in December of 2023, the largest Social Security number, basically fraud investigation for the loss of Social Security numbers, addresses, phone numbers occurred. And what happened was there's a company that the government pays to basically scan and categorize all of your information that they can find online. So every time you post a photo, every time you post a this or that or whatever. And, keep in mind, they can't always get access to the back end stuff of websites, or if you restrict a website from showing certain things unless they have a warrant. But for some of you who think you're so tricky and smart and witty, they can get warrants relatively pretty straightforward to get back access to the rest of the website. So remember, we're going to go through the triggering agents of what would cause a warrant to be created, because there are different ways that they can get into your house without a warrant, and ways that they can get into your house with a warrant. So the main thing to just kind of keep in mind with this whole situation is that you have to be aware that the photos and videos that you post online, you riding a motorcycle, you out on a boat, you fixing your house, you doing this, you doing that, you doing this, you doing that, those things are what cause the initial interest. And that's what actually begins the investigative process, because there's a specific SSA legal standard that they use to begin the investigation. And it's a much, much lower legal standard than what's used for crim law, which is like, your classic probable cause, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go through that in a bit. So just hang in there for a moment. Now, please remember to like and subscribe to this video. A lot of people always forget that, we take time and effort to write these scripts and put everything together and do the legal research to deliver to you the information you then know and use to keep your benefits, have a better life, higher standard of living. So please consider to like and subscribe. Also, I don't personally do Medicare. Like, I don't sign people up for Medicare. So I partnered with a group called Chapter. If you want to go ahead and have them do a free tune-up on your Medicare, it's a free call, 15, 20 minutes, somewhere around there, and they can figure out if you've got a really good plan. And the bottom line is they save around $1,100, for most people per month. So, compared to the plan they were already on. So I guess what I'm saying is it's a free call. I've been really bad with calling my insurance groups with, checking what insurance would be better, what could be a better price. But if you want to, it's here. It's a good option. askchapter.org/disability 339-226-6287. All right, let's rock and roll and keep getting through this real quick. So here's what I need you to kind of know about this entire situation. Anything that you post online, comments, facial stuff, whatever, it can ultimately, pull back to you because your IP address is able to be taken and categorized, and then everything thereafter can go over. Now, certain things a disabled person could do usually. They can usually text, they can chat, they can comment, right? But keep in mind, if you're somebody who's posting your, paragraphs of notes, so I'm not talking about like 3 paragraphs, but I'm talking about you put some chapters out there, all of a sudden they're going to be saying, okay, this person has the capacity to go ahead and write a book. They're going to be saying this person has the capacity to sit in one location, da 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 da, or perhaps they have the capacity to do analytical thinking and creative thoughts and things like that. So then begins the churning process of, okay, what does this person do that we can't see to show that they're not disabled? Now, what you have to keep in mind too, the SSA is going through an interesting spot right now with the new commissioner. They are trying to reduce the amount of employees they have. They're trying to work on a way to use AI to increase the amount of CDI investigations that they have, along with CDRs, continuing disability reviews. We used to look at Social Security benefits across the board as kind of like a lifetime benefit for most people, right? Obviously, some have cutoffs, like, ex-spousal benefits and, let's say SSI child benefits, stuff like that. Those have cutoff dates to them, right? But most people with SSDI, they thought of it as like a forever program, even though at 67 it ends. The reality now is that with a lot of the programs, not so much retirement, but the other programs, we don't see them now as forever life programs. We don't see them as hyper protected. They're always going to be there programs because, the government's going to default on paying you guys, in 2032, 2033-ish area. So the bottom line is basically this. Sorry, that's my AC unit. It's starting to go. So the bottom line is this, now that you understand that, you have to kind of keep in mind the government is looking for opportunities to reduce the cost and allow the trust funds to have a little bit more breathing room as time continues to go on. So here's kind of the different deal. Some of the things that will trigger them as well to start an investigation is if you're using different social security numbers. Some of you guys have burner social security numbers, just like you have burner phones. Some of you have never known that there were, burners set up like that. People buy them. There's an entire industry on the black market for them. And remember, it doesn't have to be somebody that's like not taken. Like it doesn't have to be somebody who passed away but didn't report that they passed away. It could be that somebody's using a different social security number with a different person that's still alive. That does happen quite a bit. Now, next thing is this. If you go ahead and basically use a different name on documents instead of your actual legal name, this is not so much as common with males, but with females, they will adopt names and not legally change them. This is not as uncommon as you would think. It's actually quite common. So what happens is people will just kind of like pick up a name and they'll just use it, or they'll have a nickname and they'll incorporate it. And then all of a sudden, like that's now their first name, their last name is their first name, or the last name is their middle initial or middle name or whatever. They'll change their name. That is also something that's going to red flag a situation where they might want to look into and investigate you. Another thing that pops up is buying a lot of things that you should not regularly be able to afford. And so I want to go into that a little bit so that you fully understand it. A lot of disabled people, they don't have tons of funds because in waiting to be found disabled, they had to use their money to keep their standard of living that they originally had going. It's usually a lower standard of living, but you get what I mean. They use up their money waiting to be found disabled, then they go on disability benefits. Now, some people use short-term disability insurance benefits and long-term disability insurance benefits, and then they go on to SSDI benefits. That's the luxury line, if you will, to go ahead and get onto these programs. But the bottom line is most people do not, if they are disabled, have lots and lots of assets. So the main thing is, if they see that you are registering things, and I'm going to be very straightforward with you, very expensive motorcycles, that's going to usually go ahead and flag. Very expensive RVs, that's going to usually go ahead and flag. Although remember, some of you have additional benefits. Some of you have, like, for example, VA benefits and another pension benefit and a county pension benefit and this and that. Those people, they can, they can afford some of those things. But to be fair, right, when it comes down to individuals who only get an SSDI check or a retirement check or whatever, and you're buying, let's say, a $300,000 RV, that is going to cause a flagging. Because remember, ultimately, you have to, go ahead and get that thing registered. Another thing that popped up, and this popped up with the recent person, heavy equipment. So bottom line is this. Heavy equipment, if you're getting a front loader, an excavator, something, whatever, when you put those in your name, that is a fast track red flag for them to go ahead and begin the investigative process, in which case, at some point, they're going to come to your house and see why you just bought a $50,000 machine. The only reason people buy that stuff is to either rent it or use it, or the combination thereof. Okay. So another thing that can, basically help this whole situation, is if you have flight plans all over the place. So they know that most disabled people, most retired people, most widows benefit people, they can't really afford to go ahead and fly all over the place. So if you have significant flying, right, from this country to another country, that's going to definitely get a red flag to it. Another thing that's going to red flag you is a situation where if you're flying to high violence areas, kind of like, let's just North Korea, Middle East, you know what I mean, where the likelihood of bad things potentially happening to you are high, that's definitely going to flag. Even if you're from that group, even if, like, you were born in Afghanistan and you're flying back there, that is going to red flag. So another thing too is that, if you have, you're going to, like, high areas where there's, like, drug abuse or drug sales, stuff like that. So if you're going to, like, parts of South America, if you're going to parts of Asia that have significant drug, sales and distribution lines, etc., that can also bring up a flag. Although that tends to be with a different federal agency that then communicates to the SSA something might be going on here. Another thing that we've seen time and time and time again from reading the OIG hot sheets on who they're about to arrest or who they've already arrested, who's going through an indictment, is basically where you're not using your health insurance. So some of you have a private health insurance, some of you have Medicare, Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, or you have the military version, yada, yada. At the end of the day, if you're disabled, the expectation is that you have to use your benefits. Now, if you were found disabled 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you're of the breed of knowledge, right? You're of the thought and the pattern that if they can't medically fix you, that you don't really have to go to the doctor. None of that thinking works today. If you're one of those people, like, realize you're probably going to get reviewed at some point and go through a CDR, because they're pushing harder and the culture is changing of the SSA. And yes, you're protected by the old rules that you were found disabled under. But if you've got impairments and medical can't really fix them, then you should be suffering from essentially the symptoms, which would cause you to go to the emergency room, cause you to get different medications every so often, cause you to go ahead and get different therapies, so on and so forth. So, to be really straightforward on that with that whole situation, we are now seeing very few people in America that still have the belief that if you're truly disabled, you'd be found disabled. Like, that whole gene pool of people that believe that, it just doesn't exist, because now the SSA is taking a very hard, aggressive look at whether or not somebody is severely impaired compared to back in the day. Back in the day, you had people who were like, I got it, anybody could get it. That's not how it works anymore. That's you've shown up to the wrong program to get easy money. That is not how it works. So the bottom line here with this whole situation is that if you're not using your Medicaid, if you're not using your Medicare, if you're not using basically your health insurance, then they're going to go ahead and have they're going to put up a red flag. And another thing too is that some of you have medical insurance that's not really working to your advantage. That's why I teamed up with these guys right here. Let me kind of tell you about the problem I usually hear about, but you can always give them a call to do a tune-up on your Medicare. But here's what normally happens, okay? So the bottom line is like somebody will say, well, I can't afford my 20%. I can't do this. I can't go to the hospital. I'm worried about this fee. I'm da 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 da. I can't afford this pay. I can't afford this copay. Blah 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 blah. So what happens is then they get years and years of creating excuses to not go to the doctor or hospital, behavioral center, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, as a result of that, they go through all of this stuff, right? And then, they're 12 years down the line, have never been reviewed. And the SSA comes along and says, well, we don't think you're severely impaired. And then there's a psychological factor where that person goes, of course I'm disabled. And they go, cool, where's your medical evidence that you're really severely impaired, that you're suffering as a result of this impairment? And they go, oh, well, they can't do anything. So why would I go? And then, okay, well, what medications are you on? Oh, I don't really use medications. Oh, so what do you do? Oh, yeah, I go for a massage once every month, blah, blah, blah. You have to understand like that world, that ideology, even in the VA world is starting to catch up with the SSA when it comes to veterans benefits. Boy, they are coming after veterans when it comes to investigations. Because, veterans, they'll go run a triathlon while on, compensation P&T, you know what I mean? And then everybody's just like, what the literal F is going on here? Because this makes no sense that they'd be able to do this with all these back and knee issues. So what's happening now is that this platform of OIG and investigations is going to be heavily used more so in the future. And remember, the whole thing got ramped up when we had that whole massive fraud situation of the police and the firefighters back in 9/11 that basically were claiming PTSD, but then also going out and being on jet skis and riding horses and stuff like that. Like, if you're wondering why Congress super funded this whole situation, you know what I mean? Like, super funded this whole shindig. I think what you should keep in mind, the reason is that it was it was the police officers of New York City, it was the firefighters of New York City, that a lot of them committed fraud. And there was an attorney that was working with them and helping them. I can't say too much because I actually represent some people related to that situation. So I have to be careful as to what facts are out there. Because remember, I can only give you publicly available information. I can't give you client-specific information. So there was a big problem because there was a specific doctor that worked with a specific lawyer that basically would help fill out the forms and create statements that would get these police officers and these firefighters basically, rolling in the right direction to go ahead and win the benefits. Now, another thing that I think is important, okay? Bribes. Everybody doesn't think about bribes. Bribes occur. They're occurring today. They occurred in the past. They will occur in the future where people are paying people to get a result. Now, there's a difference here. You should pay your doctor to complete a residual functional capacity form. You should, because that's extra work. They got to be paid for the time, etc. But on the other side of the spectrum is you basically gave it to them. They changed nothing on it from a pre-filled out form. And then as a result of that, they were like, they didn't even look at it. They just had their staff auto pen it. You know what I mean? That is fraud. Now, you can fill out an RFC form and say, this is what that claimant thinks that they are. Here are some of the answers as to what the symptoms are. Here are some of the things as to what they experience as a result of certain situations. Sure, you can do that. And you give it to the doctor, and the doctor takes their time and fills it out on their own, etc. That's not fraud. That's just helping your doctor, get the basics down so that they have it. But on the other side of the spectrum, just to be really clear with this thing, there are judges, there are lawyers, there are, claimants, there are SSA personnel that all, essentially have taken bribes in the past and will in the future that essentially allow people to be found disabled that should not have been found disabled. And I'm going to throw my field of attorneys under the bus. If you go search Binder and red dotting files, that was one of the most horrific scandals that affected disability attorneys. And it was one of the major things. Well, it wasn't the major thing, but it was one of the major things that made Binder basically collapse for a period of time. They've since built back up. But one of the most major mega frauds that ever existed in our industry was from Binder and red dotting files. So if you ever want to go research that, that's something that's quite spicy and you can learn a lot from that. Another thing that tends to go ahead and get you reviewed so that potentially they could begin the review process for getting a warrant against you. Asset misrepresentation. So when you say You don't have any stocks, bonds, income, stuff like that. You don't have any items that could potentially be sold, that are outside of the heirloom class, which, by the way, if you guys ever need something to research, you have something coming and you don't want to have to sell it to keep your SSI, heirloom class. Go. That's how you can protect your asset. But anyways, the point is, if you misrepresent the assets that you have, then that does tend to throw up a red flag that's going to get them interested about you. And let me kind of explain real quick what I mean by assets being misrepresented. Okay. Let's say you said you had a motor that no longer runs, and it runs, and they got a video of you driving up and down, your driveway, the local city, the local town road, etc. Let's say you say you don't own any boats, jet skis, etc. And yet in your, parking area is a boat that they've got a picture of you and a video of you, basically cleaning. Okay. Those are misrepresentations of assets. And then they get the follow-up evidence that shows your capacity to go ahead and use them. Now, the next thing is this, and I want this to be clear. There's the usual thing that's like a really fiery, big, bright red flag that causes them to potentially search, around your house, search in your house, working while claiming that you're disabled, working for the government, and then claiming that you're unemployed. And that one's, you would think they would know not to do that, but they government employees do that. It does pop up. Falsified medical records, really spicy. Getting stuck in a situation where the attorney that represented you is being investigated for fraud, that's going to red flag your claim immediately, so long as things match up. Another big one is payee abuse, where the representative payee that basically pays you is using funds in an improper fashion. That'll get you red flagged as well, but that one tends to go in your favor. All right, so let's talk about this. Now you know the things that cause essentially a red flagging, which is we're taking a look, which is we're interested to see whether or not you should lose your benefits and have administrative fines, civil fines, and criminal fines / jail. So I need you to understand that there is administrative, civil, and criminal punishments. I'm keeping it simple here. Administrative, you got to pay them back, right? You got like an overpayment, you got to pay them back. Civil, you owe them additional money, and they might watch you for a while. Criminal, you're going to jail, you're going to prison, and you might, be watched for a while. You might be restricted for a while, okay? All right, so here's basically the deal. The SSA does not use traditional intent to defraud when it comes to an investigation. The legal standard the SSA uses is reason to believe. Again, reason to believe. And so, when you look at like the chart, there's like a suspicion, a hunch, right? And then above that is reason to believe. And then above that a bit is like your probable cause, your intent to defraud, blah, blah, blah. All right. So, criminal conviction, higher, etc. So the SSA uses this reason to believe standard. And to be fair, they don't need upfront to begin the investigation all this like criminal ability, criminal activity, criminal this, criminal that. They don't need all that. They just don't need it. Because at the end of the day, to start their investigation of you and start, basically interviewing people of, businesses you go to, places you eat at, people who know you, interviewing them, they don't need a warrant to do all that stuff. They don't need to go into that criminal thing in the very beginning. They just need reason to believe, which is more than suspicion, more than a hunch. All right, so let's go through that reason to believe standards so that you understand what the SSA uses to begin their process, okay? So it's a low threshold. They're looking for specific and articulable facts that would lead a reasonable person to suspect fraud or wrongdoing, okay? So it's not necessarily, it's obviously not proof of fraud. That's like you got them. But it's enough to squint your eyes and say, hey, wait a minute. It's not just a hunch like, maybe this. No. It's a squint the eyes. Hey, wait a minute. Scrutiny level. Okay. And, basically it's enough to initiate the investigations, request medical exams, potentially suspend benefits. And I know what you're thinking. Well, wait a minute. If this is such a low standard for them to go ahead and use, for them to go ahead and have, then and for them to investigate you and begin the process of following you around, and potentially cut off your benefits, why is it such a low standard? Well, it's such a low standard because the SSA wants the ability to go ahead and investigate you easily. And so instead of requiring them to meet the criminal standards for doing a lot of this stuff at a higher level, they at the SSA have the reason to believe standard. But yes, they can use that to cut off your benefits. I mean, they don't have to go full, proof of this or that at a high level, intentionally, blah, 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 blah. No, you don't have to have first degree, whatever. You don't have to have that. You just have to have this beginning process of reason to believe, a squinting your eyes and being like, hey, wait a minute. What do you mean by that? Person might be doing this. The squinting of the eyes effect of it. Now, what that means is it means that there's basically enough information overall, totality of the circumstances, to justify a second look, to justify a further, deeper look. That's what they're getting at with this. Please, again, remember to like and subscribe if you like me teaching you about things that honestly are not really out there on the internet that much. So please remember to like and subscribe, because I mean, this is stuff that will save you potentially being investigated and losing your benefits. It's important stuff. So, okay, so we've got an example here. Let's say that basically somebody claims that they are unable to go. Oh my, what's funny about this? This is an actual case that I had. So, because remember, I represent a lot of people, and I'm choosy on my CDRs with CDI units. But again, this was a case I had. So let's say somebody is nearly bedridden or fully bedridden, and basically they're on a couch or on the bed, or at least they claim that they are on a daily basis. And then they have a video of that person driving a U-Haul truck that is filled with basically furniture. And that person arrives at the location and parks and starts to unload the smaller items. The question then becomes, how did the bigger items get in there? And that would then, of course, require them to come back to see when that person is likely to, because they'll follow you back to your house, and then they'll be out there bright and early to see when you go back there to pull the heavier stuff out. So when you're in that situation, if they notice you like loading, unloading a couch, moving, a mower, pushing a mower, whatever, that is going to create a situation where at the end of the day, in my opinion, what will happen is, they're going to be very interested in following you around. And so that's, one of those tricky things, that you have to be very careful about. And I literally had this case, I can't go into perfectly because, I don't want to do that. But the main thing is U-Hauls, moving trucks, moving vans, moving trailers. If there's a trailer or something that's supposed to move items from point A to point B involved, and you're videoed or photographed next to it, in it, in the back of it, etc., that's not a good thing for you. That's not a place that you want to be. That's not a good look for you as a disabled person. So the SSA has their reason to believe standard. Then if we get away from the SSA and look at the, crim law standard, which the SSA uses, this is the next jump up, but we're just going to go to crim law. Then we have the standard of intent to defraud. And, it's one of those things where you have to understand that, intent to defraud is a much higher standard. It's not the ultimate standard, right? It's not the final level, but it's definitely a higher level. Because remember, if you have like the itty bittiest amount, and you get a suspicion, a hunch, and you get a reason to believe-ish, and then somewhere around 50% is like that probable cause area. Anyways, so this is criminal standard intent to defraud. Okay. So I need you to know what this is before you get to how they get into your house part of this whole thing. So it's a higher legal threshold, knowingly, willfully, concealed facts, misrepresented facts. The facts were material, which means that if you change those facts, it changes the entire outcome. It changes the entire storyline. If that happens, this knowingly, willfully changing a material fact to, lie, be disingenuous in some way, that's element one. That's going to hit you hard. Then you have with the purpose of gaining something. In this case, of course, it's your Social Security benefits, but it's with the purpose of gaining something, right? So you knowingly, willfully misrepresent material facts of the situation with the purpose, with the intent to gain something. In this case, of course, gaining benefits. That's the reality there. The government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused intended to deceive the SSA or defraud the US government. So, reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt is like, way, way up there in the scheme of like, super, super high requirements to go ahead and prove. It's difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It is. I know a lot of you guys are like, when you see somebody in the news, you're like, they're guilty. Guilty. Why are they guilty? Because I know it. You're at like the second lowest at that point. You'd have to go up many, 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 many levels of proof to actually get to what they need to criminally prosecute. All right. So remember, this is more along the lines of somebody wasn't really they weren't just forgetful. They weren't just, having to be reminded. This was where they knew they deliberately did something, and they did it with a purpose. They meant to mislead and cause a scheme and do these things. So again, you have these comparison points of the SSA start an investigation, reason to believe standard, and then over here you have basically the criminal intent to defraud standard. Okay, and these are important when it comes to basically the whole idea of getting essentially the SSA to begin the investigation and then begin the process of obtaining warrants to go ahead and get access to things that you have. And remember, you have a place where you live, that's a physical domain, and then you have your online life, that's a digital domain, and they're going to get into both. They're going to get into both in some instances, okay? All right, so let's go into the next thing. So how do they do this? Well, once they start reviewing you, they begin with this process. They're going to be looking for certain stuff, and they're going to surveil you. All right, what is surveillance like? So surveillance is where they have usually 2 cameras on a person that are recording audio and video. Or surveillance is where they will park a car and have video gear in it. Or surveillance is they will put something on your vehicle to go ahead and track you. In fact, you'll see nowadays, a lot of these tracking devices are mass sold to the public because technology is paid for. And, it's basically what the cops have in a lot of instances. It reports to some device, usually your phone nowadays. And that's how they know where you're going when you're going. So if you ever put an air tag in something or a GPS locator in something and you're like, look at that, it's driving down the road. That's what they're watching you do. They're watching you basically drive down the road. That way they know where you're going. That way they can go ahead and pull up in some spot and watch you. Another thing that I think people get wrong too is that these individuals, these investigators, they're not like just SSA employees and only SSA employees. They're not. They're police officers, sheriffs, agents that have been brought into the SSA program to go ahead and basically do what they normally do. Now, OIG, when they're investigating you and following you around with their CDI units, they don't have arrest authority. They just have investigation authority. But they pull these people from the FBI, the sheriff's department, the police department, the ranger department, whatever. They pull them from those places. Another thing that I think is kind of important to understand is that when they're doing their investigation, they have entire systems planned out of how to get information out of people. Okay. And so we're going to go through how that works, what ruses are, how they're allowed to lie, but not lie beyond a certain point to find out information about you. Okay. And then we're going to go into how they get into your house. Okay. So one thing that, you have to keep in mind with this is that they do this surveillance. They have different types of cameras to capture certain things. But, at the end of the day, the surveillance might be something where they're just trying to capture footage of you lifting something that's heavy, climbing a ladder. Maybe you're, doing exercise. Maybe you are, walking the dog and you just do a little run. And then they, get a video of that or take a picture. Maybe you're driving across state lines out of the county. Maybe you're flying for really, really long periods of time, et cetera, where you couldn't have continuous sitting or it would be an issue for you. So The other thing too is that when they're doing surveillance, a lot of disabled people nowadays are working under the table more so than they ever have. That's kind of like a result of Biden sort of situation where the economy was collapsed and things were really really bad, and disabled people just don't have enough money on a monthly basis to be able to survive. So as a result of that, you see a lot of disabled working under the table. I just want to say with the whole working under the table thing, your neighbors, your coworkers are almost always the usual suspects when you get reported. Your neighbors, once again, and your coworkers are almost always the ones who basically will throw you under the bus. Okay. And remember, the SSA is very ready and willing to go and interview your neighbors, your employers, your doctors. So another thing that popped up that I don't think a lot of people think about is this. So if you go ahead, right, and let's say that your doctor's normally super nice to you, they're super cool to you, everything's awesome, they're really supportive of you, and then all of a sudden you notice the next time you visit your doctor and the next time after that they're really cold towards you, that might be because they've been investigated by the federal government for basically things that they've worked on you with in your file, etc. So if you've ever noticed that, your doctors are not acting a little funny towards you, that can sometimes be a heads up that essentially at the end of the day, they got to that doctor, questioned the doctor, and the doctor felt a little scared as a result of that. Okay. All right. So we've gone through a bunch of things that would constitute, I mean, remember a lot of this stuff, they catch you, running up the stairs. It's probable cause, basically claiming that they're more disabled than they are, fraud. They catch you working, as a side gig, a side job, probable cause, right? Boom. They caught you earning some money on the side. You claim that you couldn't earn. You didn't notify them, etc. They catch you modifying medical records and submitting them. So they buy your medical records directly from the doctor, and boom, probable cause is met. Now they've got you for fraud and they're going to go after you. So, remember, there's a lot of ways that they can grab you and make your life really kind of suck. So you just want to be aware of that. All right. Now, when it comes to obtaining a warrant, and remember, they don't always need a warrant to get into your house. Maybe we should go through that now. So how do they get into your house? I guess we should talk about ruses. Yeah, let's go into ruses. That's usually how they get into your house. So, okay. Things that they look for when they go around your house. Okay. They're making a schedule as to what you do. Some of you have no schedule. You know what I mean? Some of you are like, I wake up, I do this day, the next day, totally different. Next day, totally different. Next day, totally different. But that's not most of you. Most of you have a schedule. And one thing that nobody really talks about is that when somebody's on disability benefits, it is hard for them to get anything done. Because when you don't have a job, like you have a lot of unlimited time, not completely unlimited time, but you have a lot of unlimited time to do stuff. And when you've got unlimited time to do stuff, you don't do anything. That's just the way it's how it goes, right? So you see a lot of disabled people, and I remember one of my employees said to one of the disabled people, and I had to correct them, but they were like, God, you got all this time. Why don't you just go do it? I mean, you've unlimited time. And they were like, I don't know. And I explained to the employee, when you have unlimited time, when you're not employed, you don't do stuff. You just don't get stuff done because you're not feeling that time crunch to like schedule things out. All right, so let's go through this real quick. So when they want to go ahead and get around your house to get some info before they have a warrant, because remember, in the beginning, they don't usually have a warrant. They're going to be looking for home maintenance. They're going to be looking for you watching the kids outside the house. They're going to be looking for sounds coming from the house. They're going to be looking for, things like hammer sounds, drill sounds, cutting sounds. They're going to be listening for, things that are like, you basically working out inside the house, all that kinds of stuff. They're also going to be looking for, basically childcare or child upbringing stuff, walking a dog around the house. The child's playing in the back. You're watching them or playing football with them or playing basketball with them or whatever. They're going to be looking for, if you live in like a community, they're going to follow you around to see when you go to the tennis court, see when you go to the basketball court, stuff like that. They're going to follow you around a little. Now, another thing too that they kind of look for is that when you're interacting with people out in the public, they look at your demeanor. So it's not just physically what you can do. There's also a mental side to this as well, which is like, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you smiling? Are you communicative with other people? Are you showing emotional displays? Have you magically become Italian and you're using your hands all over the place? Is it a situation where, you're high-fiving somebody, shaking somebody's hand, or walking away, turning around real quick and waving at them? They look at the personality that you have and how you show it in public, that public demeanor aspect of it. Because remember, people that have like PTSD, depression, anxiety, they're not going to do that stuff. They're just not going to do that stuff at the severity levels that they require. Now, if you were found disabled 15, 20 years ago, I mean, you're pretty much going to fairs, thinking this is normal for a disabled person. But that is not the future. That is not even the now. So, all right, with that said, let's keep going through this real quick. So the main thing you have to understand with this whole situation is you have to understand ruses. All right, so what are ruses? So ruses are basically the ability of law enforcement to lie. They're allowed to lie. They're legally allowed to lie. Yes, they can lie. Yes, yes, yes. I know some of you are sitting back going, no, they can't. No, they can't. They're law enforcement. They cannot lie. How dare they? They're absolutely not allowed to lie. Correction. Law enforcement is, as a result of their job, required to lie. It's called, to you, a ruse. All right, so what is a ruse? A ruse is a story that they create where there's somebody else. Now, they can't provide documents to you in furtherance of the ruse that have false statements on them. So they can't do that. They can't give you documents that are like accounting sheets or like, create some blah, blah, blah to make you believe them more. They're not allowed to do that. But they are allowed to lie to your face about why they're talking to you, about why they're dressed up a certain way. So, keep in mind, they might be, for example, they might claim that they work for a utility company. They might claim that they work for a public safety division. They might, dress up as a delivery person, maybe a census person, a surveyor, or maybe like, they might claim to be a friend of yours. But the point of it is that they want to go ahead and see you without being seen, or they want to go ahead and knock on your door and talk to you. Why? Okay, so when basically, you go ahead and I see Melissa Tate said, that is incorrect. I know depressed people that put on a fake smile all the time. Yeah, but depressed people don't go ahead and show demeanor where they're smiling and laughing for extended periods, interacting with the general public. They don't. They can't do that, not for extended periods. Maybe they'll do it for one person as they're trying to get out of the way of the walkway to get away from people, but they can't do it for extended periods. They would have an overload, they'd freak out, and then for the rest of the day, the week, the whatever, they would be shut in. So, and remember, a lot of the statements I'm making, some of you guys are going to be like, no, it's this way. Give me a little wiggle room here because, you're all going to be like, it's really bad for me. Y'all play that. You know what I mean? Y'all do that. For me, it's the worst. Oh, it's so bad for me. You got to understand, okay? Repetitive, continuous conduct where they search and see what's going on. If somebody truly has depression and PTSD, where they're having night terrors, nightmares, flashbacks, all that stuff, you ain't going to see them in a park. You're just not. You're not, because there's too many people going there. You might see them in the park in the middle of the night or right before the middle of the night. You might see that when nobody's there, and they'll have mapped out when nobody's there. But other than that, you're not going to see them in a park interacting with people in the general public. You just not. Okay, you're just not. So with that said, they don't need a warrant to go ahead and knock on your door. They don't need a warrant to show up in, basically an outfit to say, hey, I got to work on your satellite. I got to work on your cable. I got to work on your internet. I got to work on your phone. I got to work on whatever. Okay. They don't need a warrant to show up outside your house and start looking at the water main system. And then you usually walk right out of your house and say, is there a problem? What happened? Oh my goodness. So they don't need a warrant for that. That's called a ruse. It comes before a warrant usually. And that's where they're trying to create basically a communication path. So here, let me give you an example of what happens. So let's say that they recently, and they'll figure that's out ahead of time. Okay, was there recent electrical line changes that were right by your house? Was there an event that occurred where somebody took somebody's life, or somebody, ran and they're trying to catch somebody and they're gonna be like, have you heard anything? Did you see anything related to this? Blah, 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 blah. These are all ruses. And the whole idea is to get you to talk to them so that you, the claimant, believe that they are in some official capacity, even though it's a different official capacity than they actually are. They will do this so that you believe, right, that you can trust them, that you can communicate with them. And so the thing is this, without a warrant, and they're very effective at this. There have been literal CDI investigations where, this happens a lot. They get access to the house. So they get you to trust them. It's all part of the ruse. They show up. And basically at that point, they'll ask you, and here's the techniques they usually put in the briefs that I read about this situation. And I can't go too much into the ones I represent because I can't give you facts direct to their specific thing. But what they usually do is they'll get inside your house because you will invite them. And you will invite them because there's some reason that they don't want to be outside. So they could be like, yeah, I have a medical condition where I can't be in the sun for too long, or wow, it's really windy out, or it's just starting to rain. And you'll say, oh, just come on in. Just come on in. Just come on in. Or, oh, can you read this? Or maybe it's too bright to read this. Maybe you can read it inside your house. Maybe you can read it inside the door. They'll get you to go ahead and essentially grant them permission to enter into your house, to step over the threshold. Now, when they do that, you have officially effed up. You have officially made a major mistake. So with that said, let's say that it's a group that comes to your house and like, oh, we have to check an electrical thing. We have to do this. We have to do that. It's very simple. Say to them, can you provide me a document that shows my address from a proper authority that's supposed to overlook the electrical, overlook the water, overlook the whatever? Can you provide me a document that shows me that you're supposed to be here? Because if they do, and it has false information on it, then all the evidence they collect, all the evidence at that point is poisonous fruit of that tree, right? So they can't really use it because it was illegally obtained, okay? Although they'll try to use parts of it to figure out how to get other types of evidence, but they play the game. So the point is, they'll try and get inside, but your main thing is you want to see a document that says they have to be there, they're supposed to be there. Because if they create a document that basically shows that they're supposed to be there and it's not real, it's not like the electrical group, the people, if they create a document that's not real that says, hey, I'm supposed to be at this house this time, then it's no longer a ruse. Then they've committed in themselves a criminal fraud. Then you could actually prosecute against those police officers, those investigators, etc. In fact, the landmark case about this, they didn't ultimately put the officer in jail or commit charges against him because they said it was just too new of a situation. It was too new of a whatever. But that was the landmark case where it told law enforcement, hey, now you do this stuff, you fraud your way in improperly, right? And then at that point, you show documents about, that aren't real. Then at that point, you are creating an unnatural situation where the person is going to believe that document that you're supposed to be there. And that's not right. So the cutoff is they're allowed to lie to you right to your face, but you can ask them for a specific document that says they're supposed to be there and why. And then examine it. Make sure it says your address, your name, reason why. Because if they created a document to get access, to fib you and put some county logos on it, some city, ordinance logos and blah, 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 and stuff like that. If they put that statute stuff on it and they make a fib, then you can go ahead and file charges against them. So the main thing is they will try to get access to your home without a warrant first. And the thing that they're usually looking for is essentially, basically, what have you done to your house on the inside that makes it easier for you as a disabled person to exist? So let's say that there's installed grab bars. That's a good sign that you're disabled. Let's say that there's installed ropes, right, to help you pull yourself or move something or help you stand up, etc. That's another good example. Let's say that there's a wheelchair there or a walker or a cane or this or that. Let's say that there's markings at the bottom of and the side of the door frame showing that you bump into stuff as you go through it. Let's say that basically there are wear marks on the floor from pushing some sort of medical device backwards and forwards. Let's say that there's, basically a door that's been modified to now be extra large and wide so you can get in and out of it easily. These are all great signs. But a lot of disabled people don't think they need it. In fact, I've had disabled people from back in the day be like, well, I'm not doing any of that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's fine. That's fine. But nowadays, it's becoming a necessity in case something like this happens, because they want to look at your house and see what the deal is. What is the deal? Are you truly disabled? If they walk in there and they see that there's a bunch of blankets that are dusty sitting on top of your wheelchair, well, then they're going to know you're a bullshit artist, right? Or if they go ahead and basically look at, for example, let's say, the kitchen, and the kitchen is immaculate, and the only area to sit at the table, because there's so much junk all around the table, is a spot that you have to squeeze into. They know you're a bullshit artist, right? So that's what they're looking for. Examples of how you truly aren't the disabled person on which you claim you are. Okay. And look, they could pose as a neighbor, community helper, a church member, anything. They could pose as any of those. Okay. Now, here's the deal. Sometimes they will go ahead and recruit people that to be part of a collaboration of a ruse. This is what I think should be illegal. For many instances, it is not. Let's go through it. So if you have neighbors that do not like you, do not like the fact that you get to stay at home and don't have to go work for a living because you get a check, and that neighbor reports you and the police pick it up and they go work with the neighbor to collect information about you, then you can go ahead and have a situation where the police officer will use that information and work with that neighbor who turned you in. Those are collaborative ruses. They definitely screw people over many, many times. Okay. All right. So let's go through some other details here. All right. So they can't, without a warrant, do certain things. That's why they get you to invite them into your house without a warrant. But when you have a warrant, right, when they go and basically obtain a warrant. So how do they obtain a warrant? Okay. So basically, a special agent, some sort of law enforcement person, will work with a prosecutor. Okay. Could be a federal prosecutor. In this case, it's going to be a federal prosecutor. Okay. Assistant U.S. attorney, stuff like that. They will draft up a warrant, time, place, length of time, why they have evidence, why they need it. And they will submit it to a federal judge. Okay. So they'll submit this thing, to a federal judge, a magistrate, some sort of adjudicator who, rubber stamps these warrants. And a warrant is basically just another name for, it allows, law enforcement to basically go places that they're not normally allowed to be. They're allowed to breach the walls, right? They're breaching the wall of privacy that the Constitution normally gives you. Okay. In that case, if the judge goes ahead and, basically, approves the warrant, and warrants come in different ways. You could have a location warrant, a GPS warrant, a geography warrant, where, you're allowed to put certain, geo tags on things. You're allowed to, basically wiretap people. You're allowed to, do those like surveillance-y kind of things. And then there's search warrants, right? Search warrants are where they basically will go ahead and search a specific location for specific items that they're looking for. And then, of course, there's arrest warrants. That's where they come and get you. So the idea is, without a warrant, they're not allowed to force their way into your home. They're not allowed to make you feel that you are basically under arrest. They're not allowed to install recording devices inside your home, inside your car. They can't lie about certain things, right? They just can't say certain things. Okay. But with the ruses, they can lie about who they are, who, what, when, and where. They just can't provide documents that further that lie. Now, here's the thing. Okay. When they get a warrant to go into your house, this is what pops up, and this is the weird stuff. This is the stuff that you really got to focus on. Okay. A lot of disabled people, their houses are a mess, a total mess. We're talking about, used soup cans all over the place. We're talking about, all kinds of stuff, bugs, rodents, whatever, all over the place. They're a mess. And I don't blame them. They're disabled, right? However, with that said, once again, people who really aren't that disabled, some people of that percentage were found 15, 20 years ago that are fine now. Some of them have improved, some of them have improved out of the severity level. There's a percentage of them that fall into that. The weird thing is that those same people, because they don't have to do anything all day, they basically don't do anything all day. So washing dishes, cleaning up, certain items, whatever. Now, I don't really blame it, because, remember, I have a little bit different perspective. I work with people and helping them complete forms in their trailer. I've seen the worst of the worst, mega hoarders, stuff like that. Now, the thing is, it used to be the thought pattern that if somebody's house was totally destroyed, that person was de facto disabled. But not so much anymore. That's not so much the feeling anymore, because what we're finding is that a lot of disabled people will go ahead and, to be fair, because they mentally have it in their head that they're disabled, they will live the part of being a disabled person, even if they're not physically, mentally, or blindness disabled. So the idea is that they will allow things to get really destroyed over time because they, in and of themselves, believe that that's who they are. Now, with that said, okay, they get access, they have a warrant, they knock, they come in, they begin the process, they're in your house. What happens then? So they're usually looking for types of evidence that prove that you are working somewhere else, types of evidence that prove that you're not using medical devices, types of evidence that proves that you're selling your pills, types of evidence that proves that basically you are not the disabled person that which you claim you are. Okay, so let me give you an example of that. Some of this stuff has popped up before, so I have to be careful with how I state it. If they go into your house and they see certain things, like, for example, surfboards, basically wetsuits, things like, for example, life jackets for like jet skiing or kayaking or canoeing. If they see, for example, a motorcycle helmet, if they see, for example, things that fall into those types of categories, okay? Things where it's like, or another one, and then this one, it wasn't this exact item, but this is a good example of it. If they go in and they find a collection of a lot of something, so like some people will collect, pine cones. Some people will collect shells off the beach. Well, who collected all those shells? Who collected all those pine cones? Weren't you disabled because of your back issues? So that's another thing that can really kind of screw you over. Another thing too is dust. And you guys, you don't dust. You don't dust. And so as a result of that, right, what happens is, the dust will accrue. And then all of a sudden, the devices that you're supposed to be using that have been sitting in the corner are covered in dust. So it's a problem because, then they've got evidence of time. How long has it been since it was used? When was the last time that was used? How much dust has accumulated on it? That sort of stuff tends to build up. And then it's a problem because all of a sudden you're sitting there going, hey, these are items that I use. And they're going, no, they're not, because they're covered in dust. All right. So, and that's another thing. If I could give you one piece to remember with this video, just one thing to keep in mind, it's the following. Have two of ambulatory devices. Have two of them. Have one at the front of the house, one at the back of the house. Have one in the house, one in the car. Have two crutches, two canes, two walkers, two wheelchairs, two walkers with a seat, two rollators. Have two. That way, if they say, well, that one isn't being used, you can say, I've got this other one over there. I've got this other one, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's just my backup. So when they look at one and it looks brand new, that's a problem. When they look at one, it looks really rusty and it's rusted out and the wheels can't be turned, that's a problem. Okay. Because that means you haven't been oiling it, you haven't been, using it, etc. Okay. All right. So with that said, as a result of all this, you have to keep in mind that when they get access, they're going to go through stuff. One thing that pops up that is not uncommon for disabled people is that they have prior charges for things. Could be for things that are very nefarious and very bad, from drugs to abuse of others and stuff like that. I'm trying to, keep it clean with how I state it. But the point is, they may find things that relate to criminal activity. Why do I say this happens? Many of you believe that a lot of disabled are as squeaky clean as you are, right? You live your life. It is what it is. You're watching Disney Plus, Hulu, whatever. There are quite a few disabled people who have, let's just say, off the beaten path hobbies. Okay. And these off the beaten path hobbies are not always something that they want the public to know. And they definitely don't want law enforcement to know it. And what I need you to understand about that is that when they get a warrant to search and see if there's fraud when it comes to receiving benefits from the Social Security Administration and things of that nature, or they get access to your house for other criminal, types of activities that you may have done in the past, or they might have something that allows them to search because, looks like there potentially could be that item in your house. I will say this. There's a lot of disabled who have not gone through the proper licensing for their state, although some states are much more liberal than others when it comes to getting, firearms. A lot of them don't have the necessary registered details. A lot of them have one that has the serial numbers wiped. A lot of them have something that, is potentially not supposed to be owned by them, such as, for example, pills that have been legally prescribed to somebody other than you that doesn't live in your house or even on your street. So I'm going to tell you right up front, and I think this is very important, that when they collect, okay, your pills that aren't really your pills, and, they use that against you, this video hopefully helped you out a little bit in understanding essentially what's going on. If you go ahead and have somebody else's pills there better be a real good reason as to why they're there. Okay. A lot of disabled people will get stuff from friends. They will buy stuff. You know what they buy. I mean, I don't need to go into that, but they will buy stuff, right? So much per pill, yada, yada, yada. And then they will stash it. Remember that if you have a safe, sometimes they can remove that safe. If you have a larger safe, it is harder to, in that moment, remove that safe. But if you have a smaller safe, they're going to take it right then and there. If they are curious about what's in the safe, but not too curious, they will usually leave it alone. But if they are really curious about that safe, they will show up. They will have an officer wait by the safe or by you so that you can't access it. And then they will bring a crew of people there with dollies to pull the safe out of your house. Now, with that said, some of you have chained and concreted your safes to the concrete pad. I applaud you. That's very good. You're just one step behind the person who put the safe into the concrete pad. Those people who put it under the floor tend to get away with a lot more with what they put in their safe, as opposed to many of you who just buy your classic Amazon safe and then you just leave it out in the open. Now, look, I don't advocate for you guys doing illegal stuff. I don't. I just tell you what they usually look for. And no matter what you say, a lot of disabled, they have hobbies that are sometimes not mainstream. They're sometimes questionable in nature. And that's because, once again, when you have a lot of free time, you start to get into stuff. You start to go down rabbit holes with hobbies, stuff like that. And as a result of that, sometimes you can end up in some really weird spots. If, for example, you are part of groups that meet up on certain days and certain times to enjoy each other, and basically a list somehow gets to the police, that can be a problem for you. That happens. I need you to kind of understand, and this is really for the VA guys. When you go and get special treatment from a facility and have a good time, just realize that doesn't mean somewhere down the line somebody reported it and now it's a problem for that facility and you just happen to be there at the wrong time at the wrong place. And some of you will laugh and say, no way, no way, no way. remember, I do those 1-hour consultations where you guys will hire me for an hour. You'll pay me the $250 for the hour or $150 for 30 minutes, and you unload your shit on me. You just unload on me what happened. And it always starts the same way. Well, so what happened was this. And we have a cool relationship like that because, you get the attorney-client privilege in the sense of me not representing you before the SSA, but I will keep your situation a secret, right? So it's one of those situations where, in those 1-hour consultations, 30-minute, whatever consultations, it always starts out the same way. And look, there's a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? You guys do stuff with your body and then make videos and you wear masks. You guys will go ahead and have people over to make videos and you wear a mask, and those will be available on the dark web and stuff like that. My point to you is the following. I don't care. I don't judge. I've seen a lot more weird stuff than any of you have. I've represented people for some of that weird stuff. Weirder than any of you have. The thing I just want you to be aware of when you're doing this stuff is that there's always a web of people who are watching. It's not always the cops, the sheriffs, the police. There's always a web of somebody who's watching. A, your phones are almost never secure. B, when you do these things that are a little illegal, you know what I mean? Just keep in mind that as a result of that, the more people you bring into that circle of doing whatever that thing is that you like to do as a hobby, that's a little bit out there, a little spicy, a little freaky, stuff like that. Just remember that it's better if you don't use your real name with those individuals that you do those interactions with. None of them are ever your friend. None of them are ever there to support you. None of them are ever nice. None of them ever love you. That's a big one. None of them ever love you. Boy, that's the marketplace of love for men feeling wanted. That, let me tell you, that's a big one. I see a lot of guys getting in trouble with that one. Another thing is too, just a side note here, and then we're going to wrap up and give me about 5-10 minutes. We'll go to the next video. Just an important side note. I think this is really important. When you bring somebody from another country into this country and you marry them, okay, this is more common with the guys than the gals, although the gals will do this now. It's becoming more common. When you bring somebody from outside of your country into this country, okay, and when that person doesn't want to leave and that person wants to spite you, they're going to report you. And usually, because of cultural differences, they will find a way to create shit about you. You don't always have to do the bad thing. They just have to make up the thing and plant the evidence. It is crucial for you to have control over the zones that you exist. Because when the police get into your house, right, and they start searching through things and magically they find something underneath a drawer in a secret compartment that you didn't even know existed. You know what I mean? So it's really important that if you bring somebody from outside this country into this country and make a bunch of promises to them and it doesn't work out, it's really important that you have control over the physical spaces that you use. All right. Attorney Walter Hnot, the most viewed and subscribed to and clicked on Disability Attorney. With that said, please remember to like and subscribe. I want to do a shout out to Leanne real quick. She did a $20 donation. Also, I want to do a shout out to Diana. She did a donation, a $2 donation. There was another person right at the beginning. I think it was Rude Rabbit, but I'm not sure, who also did the donation for $5. I want to thank those people because I've been using funds to basically purchase gear because we're going to be doing a talent show for people on Social Security benefits. It's not going to be so much for disabled people because we have to limit how they're seen, but it is more for retired people. And it's going to be a really cool show to kind of show what the talent is of Social Security recipients. Now, if somebody has an impairment and then impairment is part of their show, that allows them to go ahead and show how they've overcome a limitation, but obviously medically it's not going to disprove their disability, that we will do. We will do those as well. But I'm really excited because we have a sound stage set up. It's like a little halftime show stage, and we're going to be using that in the future. And you guys will be able to vote on how well you think they did, whatever they put in, and I hope you guys are nice to them in the future. With that said, please remember, if you enjoy the videos I make, head over to Google and type in Disability Resolution Law Firm or Disability Resolution Florida. My apologies. Throw some stars up there if you want. Totally up to you. But basically, it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort, it takes staff to make these videos, edit them, publish them, all that stuff. So, we always appreciate the stars. We really love them. All right. Now, as you guys know, I do the 1-hour consultations, the 30-minute consultations. The mini contract is below. Also, I go live on Mondays and Thursdays to answer questions for free. So if you want a 5 to 7 minute mini consultation, do the free thing. Do the free thing first. Then after that, go ahead. If you need more time, do the full 30-minute, 1 hour, etc. Unless it's going to take you a lot more time. The next video after this is specifically about whistleblowers and snitches and what protections do they have when they snitch and whistleblow on you. Okay, so that's the next video. I will catch you in the next video. Give me about 10 minutes. We'll rock and roll from there. Attorney Walter Hnot. And thank you so much, and I'll catch you soon. All right, bye-bye, everybody.